I always wanted to experiment, but marrying someone as conservative as my husband had destined me for a long life, lacking adrenaline and filled with a lot of boredom. Too bad that, thanks to this, I am facing the difficult decision of telling my husband that we are going to be parents, except that he is not exactly the father of the child. It all started when my friends told me that we were going to the beach. That made me feel free since it was my first girls' trip after my marriage. To be honest, I wasn't particularly going for anything specific, but I was willing to do whatever was necessary to make up for the 2 long years in which I had done nothing but put up with Marcus, my husband, and pretend to be a happily married woman at his side. And as they say, revenge is better when it comes double. But let's go by part. My name is Cameron, I am 32 years old, and I am the eldest daughter of a marriage that was the result of a business alliance. My parents' families were not the wealthiest in the city, but being from a nearby town, it was normal for them to have customs that were no longer seen in current times. One of them was to unite assets, companies, and money through marriage, and both they and I were victims of that. That was why when, at 18 years old, I was introduced to Marcus, I knew that this was the prospect my parents had chosen as my future husband. I would like to tell you that I rebelled, that I ran out of my house, went to another city, and started a life from scratch. But I didn't know anything other than what my parents and private teachers told me about the world, so we could say that I had a somewhat archaic view of life. I wasn't excited about having the husband anytime soon, but I knew that sooner or later it was going to happen, so it would be worse to resist it. Marcus was handsome. He was a tall man with a thin but not very athletic body, but the way he dressed showed that he knew how to take advantage of his body composition. I didn't consider myself the most attractive woman in the world either, so I wasn't very picky about who would become my partner. And that's how our courtship began. Marcus was sweet. He liked to shower me with attention and gifts that made me feel like a lucky woman. I didn't love him, and I don't think I ever saw him that way, but it felt good to be with him. Everything seemed perfect, like it was meant to happen, until something happened that radically changed my way of thinking. I was 20 years old when I entered university. My wedding date had been decided, so as a gift I opted for enrollment in a prestigious institution where I would begin my economics degree. That was not easy to achieve, since my mother was against me studying something because for her, it would be my husband who would be in charge of the finances of the family business. My father, on the other hand, hated that his future son-in-law was 100% involved in the family businesses, and he wanted me to be his heir. For my part, the company was always of interest to me, one that for years my relatives had looked after with great suspicion, so I felt like a duty to take care of it. That was why he supported me, and after enrolling in the next semester, I began to receive the classes that the best economists in the country taught there. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. "Cameron, are you ready to go?" Vanessa, one of my friends, said to me. Meeting so many people, hearing their points of view, and seeing the way they lived made me feel like I was missing out on 1,000 things. It was as if I had been immersed in a bubble that, although it gave me protection, also prevented me from living what I should do. Especially in the area of intimacy, something I had learned thanks to the stories of my friends who recounted their encounters with their lovers non-stop all night. The months before my marriage were an ordeal. I no longer agreed with the life I had lived, but I didn't know what to do to change it. My parents were determined that the wedding would happen, since thanks to the union, our company would expand to places that my ancestors could only dream of. I had no one to talk to except my friends, but they didn't understand the obligation I felt at that moment. For me, it wasn't as easy as leaving Marcus alone. So reluctantly and heartbroken, the marriage happened, and I can swear that I had never been more unhappy than on that wedding night. All the stories my friends told me seemed like a fable, something they made up to make myself look good. There were no sparks, no release, no desire. It was like eating something that appeared to be excellent, but ended up being the biggest disappointment. Months after trying every possible way and guided by the advice of my friends, I gave up. On the one hand, Marcus did not want to give in to several of my requests, since he even considered them perverse. Meanwhile, what we did do seemed to me to be more of the same, making me feel tired and bored to the point where I preferred to lie so as not to have to be intimate with my own husband. That's why my friends, led by Vanessa, organized this friends trip to help me clear my mind. They didn't mention it directly, but I knew that one of their missions was to be able to find me someone who would make me feel like a woman for the first time in my life. I didn't say it either, but I agreed with them. I never thought it wouldn't be one person, but two. On the first night of our trip, we arrived at a beach bar that served free cocktails to single ladies. It was there where I met Owen, the site's bartender, who immediately made me feel valued with his attention. He was a tall, dark man with a thick build and very athletic. He had deep brown eyes and a prominent chin, but what I liked most was his curly hair that fell over his forehead. I had been so attracted to him that I knew I didn't want to see any more men for the night. I wanted to see him up close, to be in his presence so that nothing I was expecting would happen, but I needed the push. One that came precisely from Vanessa, who had encouraged me to sit at the bar to chat with Owen after all. She knew more than I did about how to be sure you had caught a man's attention, and the ways you could seduce him. Single women get free cocktails, she said with her thick and very seductive voice. But married women who leave their husbands at home receive a whiskey on the rocks. I'd immediately blushed, but accepted the courtesy. I took the first sip of my drink, not knowing what to expect, as I had never been able to drink even a hint of alcohol, courtesy of having an overprotective mother and a husband who was also not a fan of alcohol. That was why, when I felt my throat burn, I coughed as hard as I could, trying to control the sensation. Owen handed me a napkin to clean myself, while I felt one of his big hands on my back. The touch was innocent, but the heat emanating from his body was already beginning to do things to mine. I didn't know if it was because I didn't feel that way about my husband, but it was a new, pleasant, and very comforting feeling. It made me want to get closer to him and entangle myself in the strength of his arms. At that moment, I felt him remove his hand from my back, and I was already beginning to regret that I couldn't enjoy his touch, nor his proximity, for a long time. But then Owen came around the bar to sit next to me, handing me a bottle of water that he assumed would calm the cough the whiskey had caused. "You don't drink, do you?" he asked me. I shook my head. Not a bit. He, on the other hand, smiled easily, as if something was telling him that the night would be long and fun. "You are a serious case, Cameron. What are you taking about? You haven't experienced many things, have you?" At that moment, I felt somewhat self-conscious. I knew it was obvious that I didn't have the same journey as my friends, who danced carefreely on the dance floor, while I still couldn't find a way to completely disinhibit myself. But then Owen spoke and removed any concern I felt from my head. "That's better," he told me. "This way I can teach you many things." During the evening we talked, danced, and felt our bodies to the music. The sweat soaked us, but before it seemed disgusting, it made me feel happy. It was at the best moment of the night, while everyone was absorbed in the songs that the DJ was playing, that Owen decided to go to the bathroom. I stayed there, standing in the crowd, but feeling the music, waiting to feel its warmth again. I wasn't the best dancer, but my body seemed to like what was playing from the speakers, so I started dancing without thinking about who was watching me. It was a couple of minutes in which I was like that, with my eyes closed, moving my hips to the sound he played. Everything seemed magical, like a moment of me for me, until I felt big hands on my waist. I smiled without opening my eyes. Assuming the person was Owen, that was why my hips did not stop, but continued their movements as the music grew. "You're back," I whispered. But instead of answering, Owen planted a big kiss on my lips. His mouth demanded mine, while his tongue seemed to engage in a battle inside. It was very different from what I thought a kiss from Owen would be, but I wasn't complaining. It felt nice, and it made me crave more than just having his lips on mine. But then he separated from me, and the first thing my eyes saw was not Owen's characteristic hair, nor his face or his eyes. It was another person who smiled mischievously at me, sending 100 sparks towards me. My mind had short-circuited for several reasons, but the main one was because I was seeing another attractive man so close to me. He was dark, almost Owen's height, but less corpulent. He had several piercings on his face, but the most attractive was in his eyebrow, which made me think, perhaps out of prejudice, that he was a daring and open-minded person. By like that, it called me, and I couldn't stop seeing it. However, a voice made my body completely paralyzed. "Ader, it seems like you like Cameron," I heard Owen say, who immediately grabbed my waist to pull me to his body. "Very much," answered the boy, who did not seem to have any type of remorse for what he had done. "I saw her all night and waited for the perfect moment to approach her." "What a shame she's with me," Owen reaffirmed. "I was said Ader, because you left her alone, and now she's with me." I felt Owen tense under the palms of my skin. There didn't seem to be real anger, but rather a kind of feeling of territoriality between the two. I felt like I was a prize they had to fight for, and far from feeling bad, it made me feel powerful. "Why don't we let her choose who she wants to be with?" Owen replied, smiling smugly. I knew he felt like a winner, because he had been with me all night, showering me with praise and seducing me. However, I couldn't deny that the quick attraction I felt with Ader was just as strong as the one I had with Owen, so deciding was a very complicated decision. But then I remembered. I was there alone, without my husband watching over me, without my family telling me how I should do things, without anyone dictating to me how I should live. I couldn't decide simply because I didn't want to. I longed to be with both of them, and I could do it. "Why not both?" I responded. Owen raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I shrugged, downplaying something that had been a personal revelation to me. Besides, I had heard it from Vanessa once and the idea seemed attractive to me, so we quickly headed towards the darkest alley we would have found at that hour to let ourselves be carried away by the desire that consumed the three of us. That night I felt fulfilled, and of course if both Owen and Ader were in charge of erasing every disappointment from my husband. My body protested, but I forced it to continue until I was satisfied, and both men reciprocated their attentions. I know I wasn't careful, but nothing mattered more to me than feeling them both that night. I only regretted it a little when a month later the pregnancy test gave a positive result, because I didn't know for sure who would be the father of the baby that was already beginning to develop in me. You would have problems, many for obvious reasons. My husband was nothing like Owen or Ader, so I would have to do a lot of explaining. But I could never regret what had happened in the alley of the beach bar. That had been the happiest night of my life, and I wouldn't change it for 1,000 centuries with my husband. Have you ever had to go through something like this? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.